Hello and welcome to Digital Badge Academy's webcast series. I'm Jim Daniels, your co-host, here along with David Leeser, who is going to introduce our guest today. David, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to John Makevich, who is the Dean of the Continuing and Community Education program at Mira Costa College in California. So, John, we met many years ago, really, when I was in the midst of the creating the digital badge program with Jim at IBM, and I think you were doing some early research on digital credentials, alternative credentials, and how these new technologies could be used in higher education. And now, a couple years later, you're making it real.
Indeed. Indeed. Yes, it's a putting it in action is a real opportunity to see how well the theory applies.
So maybe you could kind of kick things off, give us a little bit of insight into your background, kind of what led you to this point of bringing digital credentialing into the environment that you're associated with. Just give us that sort of overview and perspective.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's an honor to be able to share some of our experiences from a 2-year college perspective as to how to, some of the adventures along the way and getting going with a digital badging program. So just to share a little bit of my background, I actually began most of my journey in the community college system working in online education. Started as a coordinator and then eventually a director of distance education at one of the community colleges, and eventually did some statewide work in online education. And one of the patterns that I saw working in the online education space, which was at the time sort of the space of innovation in the community college system, one of the things I saw that was going to be just an incredible signal for how things were going to evolve in the future was that there was a new type of student really emerging in the community college space, a student who needed to pursue lifelong learning as a fluid venture rather than a start and end sort of opportunity. And I became fascinated with that concept, just really thinking about, what does the community college system of the future look like, and how are we going to serve those students in the future? And digital credentials really kept popping up in my space of how we could get to that point where we could start to acknowledge individuals along the way in their journey rather than waiting until the completion of an entire degree to acknowledge something that the students have earned. The all or nothing approach towards education just simply wasn't going to work in compatibility with the way business was evolving and the way society was evolving. Individuals were born with an iPad in their hands. Many of the generations that exist now, learning is available at any second, at any time on devices. We can't have it's hard to maintain a system where you have to wait 4 years before you get that benchmark, right? So that became a real fascination of mine, and started to get into both the continuing education space in the community colleges, as well as sort of accenting that with the pursuit of more fluid credentials that individuals could get in that journey. And that's where I became interested in the digital credential space. At the time, more using the term digital badging, but trying to identify ways that we could better serve our students with accomplishments along the way rather than waiting until that end point. Our endpoint in the community colleges is either a 2-year associate's degree or certificates. But either way, it's at the very least multiple courses that students have to take. So there's still a waiting game. If we could start to acknowledge skills along the way, we would expect that more students would stay on board, feel more motivated to continue their efforts, and employers could start to acknowledge key skills that students are learning along the way. So that's kind of how I got to where I am right now, and where our journey begins at the college.
Who are the students today in the community college system? Because I think things have changed over the last 10 or 20 or even 30 years. And, what are their needs, and how does that plug into the workforce and back to that need to be able to provide this incremental approach?
Well, I think that, it's so hard to describe a community college student in a nutshell because we serve such a broad array of students and needs. What I will say is that, 10 years ago, the typical, quote unquote, typical community college student was somebody graduating from high school, going into a community college, pursuing an associate's degree or transfer to a university, typically a UC or a Cal State University. Those students obviously still exist in bulk, but there definitely is a declining percentage of those students coming out of the high school system, both because of demographic shifts as well as just a reduction in the number of students going straight to college. So that population is declining. All the while, there are increasing numbers of employers, like IBM, for example, that are starting to hire individuals without needing a complete degree, based on credentials along the way. And so there's increasing numbers of individuals seeking us out, saying, hey, I'm already working, but I want to work in a better environment. I want to improve my employment. What are some of the ways that I can pursue that? Which skills can I start to bolster? So we get increases in, say, ESL programs, where there's individuals who are in the workplace doing a job, they're employed full time, but they want to improve their English skills in order to be able to expand the number of work opportunities they have. That's one example. There are hundreds of other examples of those particular types of students that are already positioned, already doing, essentially their life career, but they want to make it better. And so that's a population that I think most of the colleges are trying to pivot quickly and serve. We're seeing dramatic increases in the number of continuing education students that are enrolling at the college, certainly relative to the typical credit student that's looking for transfer.
So a lot of upskilling and reskilling.
Absolutely.
And that's life today.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, it seems like I almost bring this up every webcast we have, but I'm a product of a community college. I spent the first 20 years of my career having earned an associate's degree in electronics engineering. This was in Nashville, Tennessee, and had a phenomenal career. I do remember a couple of things. One, spending 2 years, that degree that I was after, that associate degree, seemed a long way off, even though it was only a couple of years, right? And I did drop out at one point. But then I came back. I was motivated by external circumstances, and finished up my degree, and off I went, and had a great career. Eventually went back to school and earned a bachelor's degree. But I was struck by what you said earlier about leveraging credentialing, digital credentialing along the pathway throughout that time span, and what your thoughts and ideas are there, maybe what you're working on to actually facilitate that kind of a strategy.
Yeah, good question, and thanks for sharing that. As David indicated earlier, some of my early work with digital credentials and digital badging was researching, in particular, the motivational component of badging. How does earning a digital credential potentially have impact on a student's motivation to continue their learning? And I sort of stalled out on some of that research, but I got enough of the way through to recognize some key signals that there definitely was something to that there was definitely some motivational component that was driving students to continue to pursue more learning based on getting some recognition of the skills that they've earned along the way. And that, I would say, combined with noticing that change in the sort of quote unquote typical type of student coming to the community colleges, certainly motivated me at the college that I'm at now to kind of take a look at our existing structures for continuing education programs, how we recognize accomplishments along the way, and start to revamp that. And that's sort of where we are in our journey, is we've gotten past that recognition point that we need to prepare and adapt for the current student a bit more, and certainly for the future student, to be able to acknowledge those in a more fluid way, the learning that those individuals are going through. So that was a big motivator for us to start to say, hey, we can look at things like student learning outcomes and accomplishments along the way, and really try to motivate more students in that journey if we can use digital credentials. And that led to a year-long pursuit of a digital credentialing platform and getting folks on board at our college.
What does a digital credential program look like for a community college in your viewpoint? And I know you're still early in the journey, but from your perspective, what does it look like in a day in the life or just in an overall structure for the program? Do you break it down to and we won't get into the political aspects of trying to get it done because I know that's a big thing in any organization, but does it, because there's a lot of discussion on how far you break these things down to
Yeah.
motivate people. Do you start to badge on the individual courses? Do you badge on skills? Do you badge on semesters or whatever else? But so could you just maybe give an idea of what you think the architecture, a view of what a program should look like?
Sure. The analogy I like to bring up is if you go into your wallet and you grab a stack of cash, let's say you have a $1 bill, a $5 bill, and a $20 bill. They all fundamentally look the same. They're rectangles, right? Same size, right? But they carry different value. And that's really sort of the spirit of how uh, I think it's important to issue digital credentials in an organization at multiple levels, because our students have such different needs, right? And their needs and then you have to look at, digital credentials can be a means to employment, but they also can be a means to just having the motivation to persist in your learning. So I think it's important to have a broad array and spectrum of types of digital credentials available, ranging from within a course, giving the instructor the agency to be able to issue credentials for student learning outcomes, for accomplishment with of key components within a course, ranging all the way up to degree completion, completing an associate's degree, completing a certificate within the community colleges. So that's the I don't want to say end point, but that's the envisioned goal at this point, is to be able to get a system that is utilized at multiple levels within the organization. Um, Early, however, we have to look at what are we going to be able to do to get people on board. What's not going to require monumental infrastructure shifts, that folks are going to easily say, well, we'll make this a priority, we'll put this on our list, and it'll just end up in line, right, with all of the other priorities. And so the starting point, in my view, is to start with what already exists: degrees and certificates. So we look at associate degrees and existing certificates that are approved through the California Community College Chancellor's Office. And we start issuing digital credentials for those. So students that complete those get the certificate, they get the paper certificate, and they get a digital credential along the way. Now, the results of that, the impact of that, I should say, it's probably the least impactful portion. Students are already receiving a certificate, so now they're getting a digital credential. Great, but it's to build familiarity, right? It's to build some sort of recognition that this is a thing that carries value. And I think that is critical if you're going to get digital credentialing program out of the gate at any organization, is getting people accustomed to seeing these things and understanding that they carry value. And so that's kind of where, phase one, in my view, of getting this off the ground and getting the system employed. But to answer your question, the future of that is to create a broad spectrum of digital credentials. I'll give you another example. Student learning outcomes in the California community college system were sort of revisited about 10 years ago or so as a key objective in the community colleges. And there was a lot of work at each college, sort of state mandated work that was focused on, okay, y'all need to put together student learning outcomes for all of your courses, every single course. And they need to be clear and stated and all of that. Well, great, but there wasn't coordination. So you could have a student learning outcome in a philosophy class that actually might be remarkably similar to a student learning outcome in a sociology class. But those two instructors didn't talk. So now you've got them worded differently, right? A huge missed opportunity where you could have a digital credential that overlaps with both of those classes. So that's another piece long term that I seek, is that we could start in our continuing education programs and collaboratively identify key overlapping common skills, student learning outcomes, and align those across courses and then create digital credentials for them. As you can imagine, that's going to take a long time, but that's an important goal along the way.
You said a couple of things that I just wanted to say amen to because it's things that I've been preaching for a long time. One is, when you get started, badge what you have, which you stated by first focusing on the degree and the certificate achievement. Perfect. That makes perfect sense. Absolute perfect sense. And of course, you're right. Those are going to tend to be the least impactful at the end of the day because the digital credential they're getting is in parallel to the traditional, credential that they would receive. The other thing you said, I love your analogy about the $1 bill, the $5 bill, and the $10 bill, because that sums up perfectly what I've always believed, and that is that you can have granularity and diversity built across your digital credentialing strategy. Some things may be on a lower level, maybe more foundational in nature, while another credential could really point out a fully developed competency or skill, right? And so you can have things at different levels. The key is just to make sure each are valuable, right? And I'm going to be using your analogy, by the way, going
Sure.
forward. So I hope that's okay.
Not a problem.
Yeah. So a question as a follow up to that, though, and as far as the earner of these credentials, what have you found yourself? What kind of challenges do you see getting the earners to understand what the impact could be to them, what the value is to them, and what have you done to sort of counteract any misunderstanding or just not understanding of what these credentials can do for an earner?
Well, again, we're so early in the process that a lot of what I'm about to describe is what we're planning for, what we're setting the stage for,
Mhm.
and not necessarily in real life what students have experienced because we're not at that point yet. But I will say that I expect that initially the vast majority of our students are not going to immediately see the value of this. They're going to get a degree or certificate. They're going to get a digital credential, and not at that first second they receive that digital credential, they're probably just going to think that that's the way degrees and certificates go. Maybe that's the way we've always done it. Okay, you get your degree, and here's this digital object. Where I think it's going to start to make a difference is there obviously are increasing numbers of tech savvy students that we have going through our programs. And I think it's going to become very quickly clear the value of sharing these accomplishments on social media and the easy portability of being able to say, I did it, I completed my degree, I completed my certificate, and let me show off, right? Let me celebrate that. That's, I think, where the first key motivator for students is going to be. They're going to start to, it's without, I think, much prompting, students are just going to start to see them. They're going to start to see them in social media feeds. They're going to start to see them popping out. Employers, I expect, local employers will start to see some early signals of these things popping up in individuals' feeds, right? Some of their employees' feeds. They're going to start to need to be able to visualize those and see those out there. So I think that early, that's the familiarity piece, is just giving students without much prompting the easy, and this was part of what led us to choose the system we chose, is without question to make sure that it is incredibly obvious when a student gets this digital credential how easy it is to share out to all these platforms.
Right.
And so that's I think the first step, right? Is you don't prompt them, you don't say, "Hey, go do this." You just let it happen. And I expect that students will get that, get those posted out there. Familiarity starts to get built, and that's where you really start getting the student push. As you start to get to more of the granular credentials, there's already some sense of what these things are.
I think up front, two things on that. One is we found, and we still find, that especially with audiences that haven't been in the labor market, or they haven't been in the sophisticated side of it, where they're connecting on LinkedIn and all these other things, that they need to be marketed to. They need to know very specifically, A, set up your LinkedIn profile. B, here's what you need to do to share these things. And C, here's how here's the list of the reasons why you should care. Because in many cases, the badge claim rates are relatively low for audiences that aren't really sophisticated with their approach to the labor market. So there is an absolute need to market and communicate to students, just like you do to professors and everything else. And I want to just back up to something you mentioned about the employers,
Mhm.
because I think that's a really important point. I mean, we see a lot of studies and data that show that employers don't believe that the college system is producing the skills they need to do the job. And so when you get down to the level of issuing badges in these courses, and you talked about the list of skills or competencies that come out of the philosophy or whatever they are, is there any work being done at your level or in your school to align to what the job is to be done and what the labor market data shows and the taxonomies that are needed, from Burning Glass or Lightcast or whatever it is, that this is what's actually showing up in the job descriptions and the needs that the employees have, to let's align that to what are the outcomes that come out of this class. So there's really a nice, easier understanding. An employer could very easily see, oh, they have this and they have it at this level.
Yeah, good question. So, their career education, sort of the career education space in the community colleges, has grown and matured a lot, particularly over the last decade or so. And there's much better alignment between what employers are looking for and what colleges are producing in concept, in spirit, right? So essentially, there's a good sense of here's the labor market data. The labor market data and some of our local employers say we need programs in X, Y, and Z. We go and create the curriculum, create those programs. Yet the students that complete those programs, depending on what program it is and how it was put together, that match may not be perfect. The graduates, the completers in some of those programs, it might not be the exact fit that the employer was looking at. And I think that that's a problem that exists across the spectrum between the employer and the college. The employer didn't look granularly enough. They started to just say, well, we need a bunch of people that do this. We need to hire a bunch of these positions. They didn't look at the individual characteristics of the student, the sort of the employability skills combined with the hard skills of the particular task, um, personality and approach to the job, all of those other component, the other things that are really the secret sauce for whether somebody's going to be a good fit. Those, I think, employers are not yet broadly trained and understanding that. And I think it goes back to your marketing piece, right? It'll be incumbent upon us to educate the employers at some point.
Mhm.
I expect that that there will be an effort to develop a sort of local consortium, if you will, of local employers in partnership with the college that already exists to some extent with advisory groups and whatnot, but it's very fragmented right now. We need to create a nucleus for that opportunity. But yeah, I think that so there's a lot of good work that's going into looking at labor market data, creating academic programs, and trying to create that pipeline to the jobs. And again, sometimes it's working pretty well, sometimes not. So that's, I think, part of that marketing piece ultimately is going to, or educational piece is working with employers to get them to understand the sub skills, the learning outcomes, learning objectives of at that granular level of a course, to understand whether the individual is truly getting the component skills that they need to be successful in that job. And that is where I think we can get the employers to buy into digital credentialing. I envision a future where there can be, so curriculum development is entirely the purview of faculty in the community colleges, and that creates I think, a rich and valuable and important, sort of groundwork to lay to make sure that the curriculum is truly educational, is going to get across to the students what they believe from a conceptual point they need to learn. But to some extent, there can be some partnership with the employers on hey, well, what if we tweak this skill, or what if we make some modifications? So getting employers a little bit more involved in the curriculum development process, not necessarily in creating and writing the curriculum, obviously, but sitting on the sidelines and providing some input so that faculty have real world examples that can be tied in. And again, training both, helping to make sure that both faculty and employers understand that it's not just about, well, okay, we need a welder, so let's make sure they have these skills to be able to be a welder. It's far deeper than that. There's so many other layers and nuances, and that's, I think, where the digital credentials can carry a lot of value too. Really helping the employer and the school understand that, again, there's different values for those bills, right? There's a $1, a $5, $20, and understanding that they can sort of scaffold those skills along the way. So that's a lot of work, right? That's going to take years to truly get that put in place in a way that's meaningful, but it is on my roadmap for where we take our efforts.
Speaking of roadmap, I'm curious to know if you're giving any thought to experiential types of activities, things that are happening outside the classroom, but are complementary to what's being learned in the classroom, right? I mean, David and I have seen at least some early work going on in the higher education space where what's happening outside the classroom. Internships are an obvious one, right? That one's an easy one, but even extending beyond that. So anyway, just curious as to if that's something that you've given thought to, and if so, kind of how you see that fitting into the work you're doing.
Yeah, good question. So our college has a really robust career education program, and through those efforts that exist, primarily for traditional credit students, so not for our continuing education students, but through those efforts, there's a lot of work-based learning that's being employed currently in sort of a sprinkling of different courses and degree programs and certificate programs throughout the college. I wouldn't say it's mainstreamed at any point yet. I wouldn't say that there's a broad and consistent understanding of how to apply that, but it's definitely happening in parts at the college. Through so work-based learning expanding into internships and apprenticeships. I mean, all of that work is happening. The issue, again, and where I think digital credentials can create some value, is this all needs some glue. These good, really effective practices are happening in bits and pieces in a scattered way throughout our system. So we can definitely say, yes, these great practices are happening, and there's examples of them, and we showcase those examples. We do a great job of that. But is it happening consistently across our coursework? Are we looking at, is it just the welding classes, let's say, for example, that are demonstrating work-based learning? Or are we really starting to apply that even to more liberal education courses, philosophy classes, and whatnot? Are there ties in, from that learning into something more applied? So there's, again, a lot of these things are happening in small enclaves within the college, this particular program or that particular program. Digital credentialing, I think, can go a long way into creating like I said, some of that glue to bring all of this together and to start to get both the faculty and local employers to start to understand or start to be able to crystallize the different layers of accomplishments that can carry true value for the student.
Just changing subjects just slightly here. If somebody is trying, somebody's a leader in a community college like you are, and they're just finding out about digital badges or digital credentials, and that's a lot, right? There are a lot of schools that haven't even adopted it. What would you say would be the first steps that they should take to start their journey? And as far as deep into the journey as you want to go.
So kind of going back to what I mentioned before, I think if they're coming into this space new and they haven't really touched on the use of digital credentials, and again, that's the vast majority of my colleagues that I'm working with at my institution, right? Most of them have very limited, if any, experience with digital credentials, and they wonder, well, what is this for? Is this just a fun thing we're doing? Is that, so I think part of getting the ball rolling again goes back to uh, issuing digital credentials for the things that already exist, so that we can get people who aren't familiar with digital credentials and their value to start to again see these things in action with efforts that don't require earth shifting changes at the college. So, for instance, in our early conversations, when we started to look at digital credentialing platforms, that was part of the conversation. Well, why are we doing this? What is this gonna, what is this for? And I think that initially you had a lot of people that were saying, "Oh, well, this is great. It seems like something extra we can give the students. That can't hurt, right? We'll give something extra, and it'll be great. They'll have a digital version of this credential, all of that." And I honestly would say that's where I think a lot of our faculty and administrators are at this point, even still. Because, and this is really important to underline when you're getting an effort going at an institution, because it's not a threat. If you start to dig into all of the other complexities that we've talked about today, the different sizes and different motivations for credentials, you start to break silos. You start to pierce silos, and that's a threat to people. And that can create a situation, and this is why sometimes you have to take those half steps back. That can create a situation where not only is somebody not buying into it, but they're opposing it. And that opposition can kill a program before it even gets off the ground, which is why I go back to, start with, you may not need to get everybody to see the end point. You may not need to get everybody to see the real value that these credentials can carry. Initially, they can see it as an extra. That's okay, because that's where you're not going to get people breaking down the wall. Over time, once the students can start to drive some of this, and faculty as well, the wheels are already turning. Then you start getting a broader implementation across the college, and start integrating into student learning outcomes and other areas where this is already in place. Folks start to see this is what we're doing. And so, we just need to continue with that effort. So that's why I would say that's a big reason why at this point, most of my colleagues would probably say that we're issuing digital credentials and it's a nice to have. And so that's the beginning part of the journey.
That's really interesting, because in business, nice to haves get cut.
Mm.
And I know when developing the digital badge program at IBM, and Jim's developed hundreds of different instances of digital badge programs. And every group that I've ever talked with, from Google to Microsoft, Amazon, whomever, if there's not a solid business case that it is essential to the business, it's just considered an expense and a nice to have. And expenses and nice to haves are the first things to get cut, unless they're going to be producing 3x or 10x value.
And in the public higher education system, I think probably broadly beyond the California community colleges, we are a laboratory space. We are a space where innovations do have an opportunity to get tried. So you're absolutely right. The strategy is a little different, right, for how we get this going,
Yeah.
because we have that opportunity to experiment a bit. Now that does go back to cost. It is very hard to get, and this is part of what you were saying. It's very hard to get the support, the financial support from others at the college if you're going to try to get something off the ground that doesn't have that demonstrated use case. So there's still that barrier in getting the financial support. That's part of the reason why I think it's important to start a digital credentialing platform with the resources you already have. So as a dean over continuing and community education, we have certain budgets that we can work with that are in my domain, right? So it gives us that opportunity to say, yeah, we don't have a lot to work with. It's not that we have a ton of money to start with, but we have some of that agency over those funds. So we can use a limited amount of funding to put our foot in the door and just prop it open. And that's really where we are right now. I expect over time the institution as a whole will contribute institutional funding to support this, but they need to start seeing the benefit of that, and that comes at a later phase.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the catalysts that will probably really accelerate that type of thing is going to be when the HR tech stack within employers catches up and has real ability to ingest digital credentials and make sense of them all, right? That's a piece that's kind of lagging behind right now, but is obviously being worked on. And we'll get to that point clearly. I think in the meantime, I know one of the things that I used to talk to people about when they'd say, well, how's this really going to help us? And I said, well, first of all, every time a digital credential is wrapped around something, it's going to really amplify what that is, right? So if it's an individual student's achievement, the digital credential can really help amplify that and expose that in a much better way. It can help improve, how they go about building their own personal brand, as they work their way through that pathway eventually to employment, right? And at the same time, whoever the issuer is, it can really amplify their brand, right?
Right.
And their exposure, and can even build eminence at an organizational level, uh, as well as obviously the individual level. So there's a lot of goodness. David and I have done this long enough that, we've been able to spend a lot of time doing analysis and doing research on the data and looking at things in hindsight and being able to measure that, and have seen these benefits just play out over and over and over, where now we can say, okay, it's not, that was not just a, something that we got lucky with. There's literally some sound approaches in terms of how you implement a digital credentialing strategy and ways to measure it that can really come back and show compelling value. I think you're definitely coming at this the right way. That's very clear, and I think you're going to have a program that's going to be successful and in a big way, and we'll see growth as you're going forward.
Well, I'm certainly expecting that and looking forward to that. I think that's why the biggest advice I can give is take small, is particularly if you're in an institution of higher education, take small steps that are not going to create enemies initially, to get just enough buy-in to get the wheels already in motion. You need inertia in order to be able to grow and expand on the program. The other thing too is, and we see this with many employers, you probably both have seen this with many employers, misalignment between the HR unit at an employer and the actual practitioners. So there's a lot of work we have to do to consult with and educate employers locally. That's a broader piece where our dean of career education will want to be actively part of the conversation, and we're going to need to put together those sort of work groups that help to bridge the HR units and the practitioners in the employment sector. Yeah, so the menu does seem overwhelming at times, right? When you think about all of the ways that you can expand on this. But again, I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is start with the early wins, start with the things that don't create enemies, start by building, even if it's just centered around the nice to have, start by building that and then be able to expand beyond that and demonstrate real critical value that's tied to employers. And that might mean starting with one or two medium to large size employers in the area and developing a very discrete and defined partnership with them. But that remains to be seen. There's going to be definitely a lot of work that has to be done in that space, but that's, I think, going to be a real key to our success.
Well, this has been an excellent interview. Jim, do you have any other questions or?
No, I mean, just great recommendations. We'd love to have you back, down the road, to see how things are going. I would love to follow up, with
I
you.
love that. That we can tell the story in pieces along the way, and each time I can try to share with folks some of the wins and some of the challenges along the way that there have already been things we've tripped over. There's going to be additional things we trip over, but by sharing some of those experiences, hopefully they can be a really good tool for navigating the launch of a digital credential program.
That's fantastic. John, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today.
Thank you both for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Are you looking to launch a digital badging program or improve an existing one? Look no further than Digital Badge Academy. Our highly popular online masterclass will help you gain the skills and insights necessary to achieve success. Enroll now and start learning today.